Hello, this is Unlimited Splash, where we get better at Magic together through a new draft every day. Today, I have a special one for those of you who are excited to play Lorwyn Eclipsed. I'm going to tell you the story of how I went 4-0 at my local pre-release last night and won all of these packs. So this was the pool that I opened, and the first thing that I do, like probably most people, when I open a sealed pool, is I look at the rares. So let's lay those out. So here's what I was working with. And by the way, I'm someone who doesn't really like to look at spoilers. I really enjoy going to pre-release. They put an hour on the clock. You have to build a deck. And I really like testing my raw card evaluation skills in that moment, reading every card for the first time, and trying to figure out what's good. So these are my actual first impressions of these cards. In white, I had Slumbering Walker, which seems like it could have some good synergies. It's a 4/7 for 3 and 2 white that comes in actually as a 3/5 with 2/-1/-1 counters. At the beginning of your end step, you can remove a counter from it and bring a creature with power 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. I have no doubt there's sweet stuff that you can do in draft with adding counters to it and maybe there's some graveyard shenanigans. I did not have that in my pool. So the floor on this card is an understated creature for 5 mana that conditionally rewards you with a 2-drop if it survives your end step. Not good. The next one is Winnowing, which again seems like a build around if it works at all. It's a very conditional board wipe that doesn't work against decks that have tribal synergies, which I imagine there are a lot of in Lorwyn. Lockmare was mind-blowing to me. I had to read this card 3 times to believe it. It comes in as a 1/2 for 2, okay? It has 3/-1/1 counters on it. But you can remove a counter for 2 mana to draw a card. And you can remove 2 counters for 3 mana to tap a creature and put a stun counter on it. So this thing is a beast at tempo, super hard to get into combat with because it can just get bigger suddenly with a reward. Super hard to spend spot removal on because if I'm untapped when they try to remove it, I can just draw cards in response and probably come out ahead. And at a minimum, it's like a Mull Drifter that's just a little bit slower to draw you the cards back. So I immediately felt like I really had to find a way to play this card. Champions of the Shoal requires you to have a bunch of Merfolk, and then it does some tempo-y stuff if you have Merfolk. Twilight Diviner is another graveyard build-around card. It makes copies of things that come in from the graveyard. Raiding Schemes is a enchantment for 5 mana that doesn't affect the board. Historically, in recent sets, that has not been a good kind of a card. Saner is a really confusing one. Spoiler alert, I'll talk more about this one later, but it's a vivid payoff. It pays you off for having lots of colors. And then finally, Doran is cool, a Toughness Matters card. It seems very powerful. And obviously, Shocklands are awesome. Okay, the first thing that I do, well, the first thing is look at the rares. The next thing that I always do is figure out how many cheap creatures I have in each color, because I've learned from many years of painful experience in Sealed, if you don't have a good number of creatures to play by turn 2, you're not really going to get to do anything else. So these are all the 1 or 2 drop creatures in my pool. I don't know if this is a Lorwyn thing or a bad thing about my pool, but I really didn't have that much. Seeing this immediately made me feel like red is very hard to play, or if I paired red with any color, it would almost certainly have to be white, because if you pair red with black or red with green, for example, you only have 3 creatures to play by turn 2. That's probably not going to do it. While white has the most 1 or 2 drops, blue actually has the best 2-drop. So the first thing that I wanted to try was a blue-white deck. So let's lay that out and see what it looked like. My blue-white deck would have been something like this, and it was super unconvincing to me. The whole reason to play this deck was the curve, and it doesn't even look that incredibly fast. I'm playing some unsupported, maybe just bad rares, like Winnowing especially, and I'm also very split between synergies. I have a bunch of Kithkin cards like Kinsbale Aspirant, Gallant Foul Knight, but then I also have a bunch of Merfolk card, like the Merfolk Champion card here, as well as the Meanders Guide. So I'm kind of in 2 different tribes, and I don't know how well they're going to mesh. And as a general point, if you do pre-release this week, I found this often in these tribal type sets, like Bloomburrow especially, in Sealed, where there's this kind of tough situation. You either open the tribal synergy stuff or you don't, and most of the time you don't. So in Bloomburrow, where by the way, I had my worst run at Arena Win-A-Box Sealed events ever by a lot, I really had this experience very often where I would just open, 1/3 bats, 1/3 of what you want for otters, and 1/3 of something else, and I would just not have a deck between those cards. Often the best situation or the best strategy to pursue in those situations is to try to find something else to do that's not the tribal thing. If you don't have an obvious tribe, see if you can do something across tribes or something with a different synergy or just individually powerful cards. While looking for cards that are individually powerful or other synergies, my eye immediately was drawn to Saner, which is both. So briefly summarizing this card, it's 2 and 2. Is it for a 2/4? At the beginning of your first main phase, you reveal a card from the top of your library for every color among permanents you control. For each of those colors, you can pick a card out of those revealed ones and exile it. And then you can play that card this turn. So if I have just Saner out, that's my only non-land permanent, I can reveal 2 cards, one for blue and one for red. And then for each of blue and red, I can reveal a blue card and I can play that this turn. I can exile a blue card and play that this turn, or I can exile a red card and play that this turn. Or I can do both. Glister Baron is a kind of a similar payoff. So for each color among permanents you control, at the beginning of your combat, you give a creature +X for each of those colors. Kithkeeper is a worse vivid payoff. It just makes a 1/1 for every color among permanents you control. At least in my deck, it felt worse. And Puka's Eye is a really interesting one. This is both an enabler and a payoff. When it enters, it replaces itself. You just draw a card. It becomes any color that you want, and then you can draw a card if you have a permanent of each color. Foraging Wickermaw is a really interesting one. So we've seen a lot of these 1/3 for 2 colorless creatures that can filter for 1 mana of any color once a turn. They've typically not been good in recent formats, but they upgraded it in a few ways here. Number 1, it comes with a Surveil, which is totally sweet. Number 2, when you filter for a color, this guy actually becomes that color until end of turn. So if you make your Foraging Wickermaw black, for example, and you have Saner and Glister Baron out, you're adding an extra 1 to each of those X costs. Although for that to pay off with Saner, you actually need to find a black card to be the card that you reveal for black. And then over here, I put my fixing. It's not awesome, but in addition to the Wickermaw, I had Changeling Wayfinder, a Great Forest Druid, and a Steam Vents. The common color among Saner and Glister Baron is green and, well, the common color is blue, and then it's either green or red. But I had Great Forest Druid in green. I definitely wanted to play blue as well because that's the color of my best card. So I figured, why don't we put together a green-blue deck and see how that looks? Especially because I noticed that red only has 1 2-drop creature. So this is the deck list that I ended up running. My curve was pretty good and my creature density was excellent. The key enabler was these Flaring Cinders and Wary Farmers. They don't do that much that's important, just kind of marginal card selection. The Wary Farmer surveils if another creature came in this turn. Flaring Cider lets you pilfer sometimes. But the crucial thing about me having so many of these hybrid commons before turn 4 is that if you have a Wary Farmer out, that's green and white, and a Flaring Cinder out, that's blue and red. So between those two, your Glister Barons are giving everything +4/+4, and your Saner is flipping 4 cards. Add on either Foraging Wickermaw or the Puka's Eyes, and you could be doing all 5 colors. A really unfair thing to do is Gravelgill Scoundrel, which can make itself unblockable, combined with Glister Baron. Suppose those are the only 2 creatures you have out, and you've also got some Puka's Eyes or whatever. Sorry, I'm trying to say Puka's Eye, not Puka's Eye. And, you know, you're giving it +4/+4 or something. Then Gravelgill Scoundrel can tap the Glister Baron to become unblockable until end of turn, and it's crashing in for 5 unblockable. That's pretty brutal. Lochmare was just as amazing as I expected. Some of my 2-drops were definitely filler, and Assert Perfection and Pitiless Fists were minimal concessions to the fact that every deck should have removal. That was pretty much the best that I could do. One really important note, though, is that my best cards, Saner and Glister Baron, are both 4+ drops with no Enters the Battlefield effect and no protection. In the case of Saner, it triggers at the beginning of your first main phase. That means that when I play it, it has to survive all the way until the beginning of my first main phase on my next turn. So my opponent gets to untap, and they have a whole opportunity to remove it. This is a lesson that I learned from Alex at Limited Level Ups, a great podcast and channel that I'll link in the description. In contemporary limited sets, 4 drops with no ETB and no protection have just traditionally not been a very good category of card. They're usually underperformers compared to what you would think just from reading their effect. This is because people have so many chances to trade up with like a 2-mana removal spell, let's say. With Glisterbairn, the situation is a little bit different. It is a 5-drop with no ETB, enters the battlefield effect, and no protection, no ward, and no hexproof. But if you play it on your first main, it only needs to survive until your combat step for it to at least get a trigger off. So the floor on this card, well, the floor is really low if you don't have a lot of colors among permanents. But suppose your opponent's tapped down and you have 4 colors. The floor is that it's at least going to give something +4/+4 for 1 attack, and then probably go 1-for-1 with a removal spell. All of this also meant that Blossoming Defense was a crucial trick, giving things hexproof. This is the Snakeskin Veil of the set. It's at uncommon, so you won't need to play around it quite so much, but this is really important for helping cards like Saner and Glisterbairn live long enough to do their thing. Lochmere was just as good as I expected for exactly the reasons that I expected. And another card that I was very happy with is Puka's Eye. So this card immediately replaces itself. And then the floor on it is not that bad. It's you spent 2 mana doing nothing. Not great, but maybe not a disaster. The ceiling on it is unbelievable. If you get all 5 colors, then you get to just start drawing cards like nobody's business every single turn. And I sometimes had 2 of these out and was drawing off of both of them every turn. My opponents sometimes had to spend removal on, I don't know, some random wary farmer just to try to shut down my Puka's Eye. And my opponents kept saying things that I found funny, like, wow, those Puka's Eyes were actually pretty good once you got them going. To me, my style of Magic, I love these cards that replace themselves and then make you 2% better than you were before without affecting the board. For better or worse, that's a style that I am very partial to. I'm not saying these are going to be amazing in the data on 17 lands or anything, but I will say it was really nice that it's both an enabler and also a payoff, both packaged into one card that really doesn't cost you that much in terms of mana and costs you 0 in terms of card advantage. In the end, I definitely got lucky. A bunch of my opponents got mana screwed or totally mana flooded. I actually thought on spec that this deck was going to be something like a 1-2 drop, 1 win, 2 losses, and then I go home for an early evening. That's actually what I thought when I put it together, very sincerely. I think I definitely got lucky. It was a combination of me getting lucky and my Saners and Glisterbairns just happening to not get removed and just start going off. And also me underestimating the amount of Vivid synergy that I actually had in my deck. Basically every single game, I was asking the question by putting together some very powerful Vivid effect. And my opponents, if they didn't have the answer, were in a lot of trouble. So I'm not saying Vivid will necessarily be like a top deck in the format, in the draft format or something, but I would definitely consider it in pre-release. If you're doing a pre-release this weekend, I went 4-0 with this deck, which did not look that great to me on paper. I don't think it was an amazing version of the Vivid deck, but I think if you get a few of the Vivid uncommons, it might just be a better synergy than whatever tribal pieces you can merge together. I beat a lot of decks last night that were like half Kifkin, half Goblin or something, and they pushed them together into a white-black deck that really didn't play well together. Their Kifkin pump guy would not really be pumping anything. Their Goblin champion would not have a Goblin to champion, just as examples I'm making up. But that kind of thing happened a lot last night, and my Vivid stuff was always at least, Saner's always getting at least 2. Glisterbairn's always giving at least +2/+2, and you can very easily make it much better with some commons that you have a good chance of finding in your pool. So in all, I managed to win 4 matches. 2 of them, I got 2 wins and 1 loss. One of them was especially close, where my opponent just had tons of removal and was just always destroying my Saner and my Glisterbairn. But I had enough little bits of either incremental card advantage, let's say through the Lochmere or through getting 1 or 2 turns with a Puka's Eye, and enough just simple 3 power creatures that them going 1-for-1 in the end tended, at least within our match, to peter out a little bit while I still had threats on the board. And then there were 2 other matches that I won 2-0 a little bit more handily, mostly just by getting my stuff off, sometimes while my opponents were having mana problems. Before I wrap up, I do want to say a word about Doran. I wouldn't be surprised if some people were screaming at their monitor about me not even mentioning thinking about building around Doran, because look, this card is totally sweet. This version of Doran is a 0/5 for 1 and what is this? Abzan. Each creature you control with toughness greater than its power costs 1 less to cast, which actually mattered in one of the games. I faced this card and someone was kind of ramping with it. It was cool. And then this is confusing. Whenever a creature you control attacks or blocks, it gets +X until end of turn, where X is the difference between its power and toughness. So because of this card, I do recommend bringing your Abacus to pre-release. It's a lot of mental arithmetic. The reason that I didn't build around Doran is a very deep point. Look, I'm someone who has lost, probably been losing tournaments since before you were born, trying to build around cards and totally failing. I have lost so many gems, way more than I can count, from chasing build arounds. It's super fun, but I've learned a lot of hard beats that way, going 0-3 in plenty of drafts where I tried to live the dream and didn't get anywhere close. So take it from me that Doran is an individually very powerful card. But if you are building around one card in a sealed event, you need a plan to either, number one, find that card in your deck somehow, or number two, to have a good deck even without it. I actually last night heard someone say they built around Doran and their deck sucked whenever they didn't find it. If Doran is the bottom card on your library, or even in the bottom 15, your deck needs to still function without that card, or you need to have enough tutors and card advantage and shuffling that there's a really good chance that you're going to hit it. Actually, as soon as I said that, I realized I think shuffling is statistically not relevant. Stats profs, back off. So really the reason that I didn't try to build around Doran is I had absolutely no plan for what my deck would look like if I didn't draw it. And after about 30 seconds or maybe even 10 seconds of glancing at cards, I felt like the cards that I would put in a Doran build around deck were individually not very good if I didn't find Doran. One final question is, why not put Doran in the Vivid deck? If I had Doran out, that would give me all 5 colors if you combine it with Saner and Glister Baron or with my common level hybrid cards. The reason I didn't do it is actually very subtle. So I really love trying to push the bounds of my mana base. I am extremely tolerant of getting mana screwed when it's my fault. But if you look very specifically, if you look at the cards that I had to fix, it's these 4. Changeling Wayfinder, Steam Vents, which is not relevant here because it doesn't fix into either white or black, Great Forest Druid, and Foraging Wickermaw. The usual rule is if you want to find your color that you need for a single pipped card that's off color and off color splash, for 1 pip, you want 3 sources. For Doran, I have 2 different pips, white and black. Now, the question is, can you double count? Because Changeling Wayfinder finds something of any color, Great Forest Druid produces any color, and Foraging Wickermaw produces any color once a turn. So I actually tried a version. I didn't play it, but during deck building, I thought about whether I could put Doran in the Vivid deck with this fixing. And it does seem reasonable that you could double count, say, Great Forest Druid. That's 1 card that can produce white. It's also 1 card that can produce black. The problem is, and actually the reason that I did not run Doran, is he needs white and black at the same time. With Changeling Wayfinder, you have to make a choice the moment you play him. You are only going to look for a plains or you're going to look for a swamp. With Great Forest Druid, it's a similar situation, right? In fact, even worse, because you tap it for a white, but then you cannot, without some fancy something to untap it, on the same turn, also tap it for a black. And same thing with Foraging Wickermaw, it can only filter once per turn. So you would have to choose whether it's fixing for white or black. So I actually would have had to find 2 of my fixing, Foraging Wickermaw, Great Forest Druid, and Changeling Wayfinder. So I think to do Doran, I would have needed maybe 4 or even 5 of these any color fixers to really count it for a simultaneous black-white splash. So in summary, I found Vivid quite powerful. I'm definitely on the Puka's Eye wagon and really looking forward to building around that in draft. And I do think that if you want to 4-0 at your pre-release as well, looking for these outside synergies or individually powerful cards might be better than just hoping that you lucked into a really good version of a tribal deck. If you found this helpful, I do post a new video every single day, usually a draft of the current set. So if that sounds cool to you, go ahead and click subscribe in the description below. If you're already subscribed, go ahead and tell your friends. If you're playing pre-release this week, I hope that you win a whole bunch of packs and have tons of fun playing Magic. And as always, don't be afraid to splash.